Sea Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And truly, love is a grown-up God. I get a chance to talk to one of my earliest inspirations, a guy who has been very faithful to me, always been in my spirit, and has led through his own heart and his own true nature a path towards peace through music. And what an honor to welcome back a guy who continues to produce new albums and play prolifically live and continue to paint on his palette. Pat Martino, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake. It's a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure, man. How are you?
Just fine. It's a little chilly up here.
Well, I'm not aware. I haven't been back to the East Coast in months. What's Philly? What's the temperature today?
Oh, it's about 20 degrees today.
That's okay. You can go get a steak sandwich. Might have a little ice on it, but it'll be all right.
Tell me about it.
Hey, Pat, I'm just wondering. Today in Maui, they are doing a benefit for SEVA, which is an organization dedicated to solving cataracts and restoring vision for people that have lost vision in other countries. And it's also an 85th birthday celebration for Ram Dass. And I just wanted to know if you would ever, I know you probably knew of him, but did you ever cross paths with him at any point in the juncture of your life?
No, I've been aware of him, but I've never crossed paths with him. No. Did
you have any? I guess the mystics of that time. I've been doing a lot of exploration into Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and then obviously the newest cat on my radar is Maharaji, who was out in India. And Bahaina, you were steeped in. You were fascinated with Middle Eastern music for a period of time, and you were integrating that into your playing. And I just wasn't sure if you ever had anyone that would be considered not a musical guru, but a spiritual guru in your life.
I think the release of Bahaina, the album that I did for Prestige Records or Muse, I forget what label that was on, but that was in 1968. And during that period of time, I think everyone here in the West was being influenced by the Far East from India. You had, as well as the Beatles, you had George Harrison, who was involved with different forms of yoga and different types of meditation. And I think, during that period of time, exposure to it, it captured my attention. And that led me into deeper concern and listening deeper. Some of the ragas, some of the Indian players, Indian artists, Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan, and quite a number of others. So I think that's what really led me into it. It was more the Eastern gamut in terms of music than it was the spirituality that was connected with it.
I agree. That's very well put. I was transcribing this interview I did with a bassist, John B. Williams. I just did one with him, and he bought a sitar on a Benny Carter tour in the Middle East, and he was looking for a music book in Pakistan or any of these Middle Eastern countries, and at some point somebody said to him, there is no book to teach the sitar. And did you, with Mickey, with your father, with the guitar, obviously you had teaching books, but was it similar in a student passing down the knowledge from teacher to student as it related to the Indian instruments, but it also related to your path? Because that is basically when the Europeans came to the Middle East and Africa, they couldn't understand the rhythms. So that's where notation began. But up till that point, those countries had no written music. It was all passed down. Can you talk about how much music was actually passed down to you, Pat?
That's a very interesting question, Jake. I think the majority of the impact that music has on one has more to do with lifestyle, with social interaction, with quite a number of things. I know when I first went to Harlem at the age of 15 years old, just the adaptation that it demanded and the cultural transition into a completely different way of seeing things affected me musically. It affected my dedication to the music, not only to the music, but even more to its source. I think that even to this very day, I sometimes receive contact with students that are more interested in musicianship on the basis of the craft. And because of that, it's eliminated, the outside world is eliminated from that study. And it's a study of text, it's a study of scalar, modal, all of the musical context. But little does it have to do with daily living. And I think that has a great deal to do with any form of music. Getting back to your question, I think, Indian music, not only Indian music, but I see the same thing with jazz. It's a matter of your output, your emotional output, the dynamics of your perspectives that are more in touch with the music and the outcome of your expression than formulas, than a system of musicality. I think it comes down to what you're perceiving in life and the moment that you express yourself accordingly.
Talking to Pat Martino live on the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk. Pat, I want to put this, we got an audio soundbite here from a guest of mine. You can try to guess who it is, but I'm more interested in the content, and then we'll come back and riff on it, okay?
Sure.
But really syncing up with the left and right hand of the organ. The way the organ plays, Jimmy Smith, Jack McDuff. I went to see Jack McDuff my first 2 months I was at Berkeley, and that's when I first met George Benson. He was 18 years old, and he was a fantastic soloist, and he plays great rhythm too. But I noticed that the way Jack McDuff played rhythm, that's what started me thinking about organ trio rhythm guitar players, other than like Freddie Green, that kind of comping, and that's where I really took off. Then I started my own group with a trio, with actually a quintet, but left-hand bass.
Do you know who that is, Pat?
That really sounds familiar, but I can't put my finger on it.
It's John Tropea. It's John Tropea.
Okay. And, for sure.
And we were talking about you as well. But what really kind of blew when I transcribed one of the passages, and it kind of blew the audience on Facebook, primarily their mind, was that what John was talking about was developing good rhythm, all right, on the bandstand. And he attributed it to the organ players, the way their hands, the way that they were doing organ on the B3. And I wanted to know if there was a similarity in your sense if you learned how to time feel and rhythm from cats that you played with, the B3 cats you played with, whether it was, McDuff or Patterson, because it was like, people were like, oh, I thought Tropea was a guitar player. Yeah, he is, but he didn't learn rhythm that way. He learned it from the B3. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, if that meshed with you at all.
Well, I think, there's no way of avoiding influence from your surroundings, no matter what they may be, including what I stated earlier about moving into a different culture. With playing, as I said, I was influenced by the players that I was with. There were so many of them that it's hard to put my finger on the source, the nexus. But I have to say this: there is also an extension and an addition to all of that influence that's innate in each of us as individuals. We have a rhythm. It is why we speak the way we do. It's why we walk with the rhythm of our step the way we do. It's the rhythm of our heartbeat. All of these things conjure up an end result, which is a person's ability to express themselves naturally and in comfort with what they have to use, what they have to work with. They're working with their experience. They're working with their physical anatomy. So, I think that has a great deal to do with it. A good example is some of the length of patterns that I enjoy personally. In some ways are a lot longer than most players. And when I get involved in that has a great deal to do with continuity. And it becomes important to me to see that it's almost similar to certain horn players, certain tenor players who've mastered circular breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things have a great deal to do with the end result, which is the identity of the individual.
This is so important, Pat. I mean, can you keep going as it relates to the? I remember you connected me with Odine Pope, and he said that when I interviewed him, him and Train used to practice every song in every key. So they knew every song in every key. The documentary I'm doing on Stan Getz, he knew how to play every song in every key. You're talking about in your solos the way the scales you play, how elongated they are, the language, the sequencing of the ideas. Can you go a little bit deeper as it relates to circular breathing and dexterity on the instrument and why that is so meaningful to you?
Well, more than scales and modes, I must say this. A study of these properties is strictly musicianship. Mm-hmm. It's strictly the craft. It's craftsmanship. I really, being self-taught from the very beginning, I had very little influence from the memorization of the craft. It was playfulness as a child with my favorite toy. And that's what I mastered. The ability to elongate and continue my favorite experience, which was playing with my favorite toy. To this very day, it still remains the same process. As far as circular breathing, I brought that up not on the basis of the application of scalular patterns or modal influence, but I brought that up in the sense of continuity, how we look at separate devices, separate experiences that we've learned. You can say it could be a scale, it could be a mode as well. But in my case, these are patterns that, out of all of the patterns that were memorized and retained, I retained only those that were influential on the audience. I noticed what was effective when people turned and looked or when they applauded. As far as all of the others that had been memorized and had been experienced, I edited all of that and kept the strongest ones. These became coupled together like links. And that's where circular breathing comes in. It's the ability to coordinate these links over a period, of course, at this point, of over 50 years, going on 60 years of experience. There are many links that I have access to in my library. So it's the ability to conjure up these devices, and the fact that they are so they're in such balance with each other, because they're the accumulation of many years of experience, and they've been experimented with for decades. So that's what I mean by circular breathing. that comes down to the individual, and it can't be studied in a book. It can't be studied in a teacher-student process. It has to be lived, and it has to be experienced by the artist to such a point where he or she then is more selective with what they've experienced to be successful in themselves.
I dig. No, I mean, this is interesting because when you talked, you were self-taught. It was about play. It was about free-form play. It was about experimenting with Charlie Erland. It was about going to Harlem. It was about learning on the bandstand, falling down, getting up at the Jockey Club. When you were discovered that you had a tumor and they gave you surgery and you came out of it, and you needed to relearn the guitar, was it the same process, or was it more of, at that point, the idea of studying, relearning through books? Was it more of a wonkish activity and less of a play activity? I mean, was it painful for a period of time to climb that mountain again?
That's very difficult to answer, but I can say this. It was more like finally learning how to enjoy life. Prior to the neurosurgery and the outcome, my interests, my intentions were completely different than they were afterwards. So I think that had a great deal to do with becoming familiar with my own intentions. I had a chance to look back at them and to make changes in what I disliked into what I turned and did like. So it's an ongoing process to this very day. It's very difficult to put in a sentence, in a description of how it started and how it ends. I don't know where it's going to end, but it certainly is fulfilling in every aspect. So I would have to say that the length of one's commitment to what they find interest in, and a great example of that was John Coltrane, how deeply he was involved since childhood in that instrument. It was his best friend. And to me, the guitar is my favorite toy. It's very similar.
Is there a way, can you at all, but I mean, is it fair to, can you answer the question that when you had to relearn the guitar, it was not, you didn't self-teach yourself again like you did as a child? I mean, did you have to rely more on an academic way of learning at that point?
Not so much. There are things that reemerge. They come from second nature in all of us, something that's latent deeply within ourselves that reemerges of its own accord. My second experience with the instrument was more related on similarities that it had with everything else in life. I then began to see the music itself similar to other facets that I noticed in everyday living. I was interested, for instance, in a 12-tone scale being exactly the same as a 12-hour watch or clock. The only difference was the scale was horizontal from left to right in ascent or descent, whereas the clock was a circle, and it had no beginning and it had no end. It depended upon where we focused our attention on it. I became more interested in the circle than in the straight line. And then I began to experiment with those 12 points within that circle, and I noticed that a good example, for instance, a baseball field, second base, or first base, second base, third base, and home plate. If you look at 12 o'clock high, you have second base. At 3 o'clock, you have first base. At 6 o'clock, you have home plate. And at 9 o'clock, you have third base.
Wow.
So in the same way, I saw that as the minor third interval in 12 tones. And then I saw the triangle, 12 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 4 o'clock, a perfect triangle, the Trinity, with another perfect representation of that particular structure. Many things began to reemerge from the 12 tones, the 12 notes, that had nothing to do with music, but everything to do with all things as one. And that became my interest, all things as one.
Starting to really cook now with Pat Martino. I think this may be our 5th or 6th interview on the radio. And for folks out there, Pat has lived a life of music his whole life. He's been talking about his favorite toy, which is his guitar. Pat, we engage. It's always a pleasure to engage with you. And I've been doing a lot of work on the side. I wanted to you've encouraged me, especially early on, to trust myself and find my own voice, which I have, and really it didn't dawn on me that in fact that was your voyage, and I think any artist's voyage as well. And I want to read you this quote from an interview I just did, quoting Bob Porter. He said, "Everybody at Prestige loved Pat Martino. Willis Jackson told me one time that Pat Martino was the only guy he ever saw make George Benson put his guitar down. He couldn't stay with Pat. Pat was the great player of that era. I don't care what anybody says. He was better than Kenny Burrell in terms of pure playing ability. What he wasn't the kind of stylist that those guys were. We tried a bunch of different approaches with Pat. Don Schlitten tried him for a while. Cal Lampley signed him and did his first album, El Hombre. And I did the last one called Desperado. He played 12-string on that. And so that's just Bob Porter. But what I want you to talk to the legions of people that are going to hear this interview, younger cats, is the struggle to modulate between making a livelihood and being yourself. Because you were going through all these iterations, and it was just sort of, aside from who's the best and this, that, and the other, the idea is that Prestige, those cats were trying to find some sort of vessel for you, when in fact, like you said, it's just this eternal circle of time, and you have to find yourself. So could you just talk to the audience about how to find people that are struggling to find their own individual voice, on how they can do that?
Of course, sure. I think most of all, something I said a moment ago, that the guitar is my favorite toy. I had many toys as a child, and like all of the other children, I was completely dedicated to each and every one of them, one at a time. And the only reason I went to something different was because I ran out of interest in the one that no longer proceeded with excitement. And I'd go to a new toy, a bigger toy, a better toy. And I was subject to sales pitch coming from my surroundings, all the things that the business uses to sell product. And I tried each one of those products. My toys began to change and change and change, but none of them ever lasted until I finally found my favorite toy, which is the guitar. The guitar still is in my hands, and I still play with it like my favorite toy. And it always gives me that revival of spirit, and its imagination. It elongates and strengthens my imagination. Well, now let's talk about the business. The music business is quite a carnivorous animal, and the record companies that you're with, you must consider their intentions for the sales of product and the positioning of the product in its proper marketplace. These are all very viable and realistic considerations. On the other hand, you have the young artist who is completely immersed in his or her imagination and hoping, most of all, that others feel the energy and feel the excitement that has produced what gives them longevity. But now they have to put that aside for a moment and think about the business for survival, and go out and find management, find a record deal, work with better players, join a higher level of the musical society that is successful because of their greatness, each of the individuals. To do all these things, there are gaps in terms of the continuity of what is produced in this process. There are times when things are great. The work is abundant. And then there are periods of time when there's a drought and there is no work. It's those periods where you're no longer immersed in your dedications that you begin to feel the horror of why things are not the way you thought they were. And it's then that the only thing left at that time is what you love the most, your favorite toy. And to lighten the pain of that period, the instrument that you've chosen does that for you. Whether it's a guitar, whether it's a tenor saxophone, whether it's a pen with the beauty of your own penmanship, as a writer. No matter what it may be, that will help you survive until the drought is over. So I think that that's part of the process that produces a great player, because the instrument is always there, and the instrument is the source of healing through the process that we must go through for the gain of experience.
By the way, the Bahina was on Prestige. I know you well enough, Pat, where, you want things done. You have ideas, and I'm just trying to figure out how much input you had. You were coming around you were doing different types of albums. I mean, the El Hombre is different than Strings. Bahina is different than Desperado. I mean, did you feel like they were trying to encourage you in a direction that you felt comfortable with in the studio as best you can remember? Or was it you walked in and they say, Pat, we got a new concept for you. What do you think? I mean, how much was it? Bob sort of was, just the way it came off to me was they were searching for a way to make you a star.
Very much so, yeah. The ideas and the change in format didn't come from production. It came from my own experience and my exposure to the elements that I was focused on at that particular time in my life. When I began listening to Ravi Shankar and Indian ragas, and began to be curious about the tala systems, the rhythms and the odd time signatures, and it led me into their culture and a closer look at that. That excitement that came from that exposure caused my interest in Indian music and the effect that it had upon me, and what I wanted to express at that given time when I had another record date coming up. So, it was a funny thing. I did 2 albums for Warner Brothers. One was called Starbright. Mm-hmm. The other was called Joyous Lake. And when I was given the entrance into Warner as a vehicle, the first thing I did with Starbright was expose them to all the things that I had been interested in experiencing more of. Some of it was heavy metal, some of it was rock, some of it was blues, some of it was odd timings, mm-hmm. odd time signatures. Mm-hmm. And when I produced that album and we did it, Warner Brothers, I won't mention any names. They were really stunned. In fact, they were in shock. They didn't know what to do with it
because they couldn't pigeonhole it, right? It was just music.
Was schizophrenic to them, So my producer at that particular time was Paul Rothchild. That they replaced the producer that was with me that when Starbright came out with Paul Rothchild, who at that particular time was also producing Bonnie Raitt and a few other great artists. And Paul said, look, and he told me what it was all about, the problem, why it wasn't working with Starbright. And so I said, oh, wow, so you want one specific kind of thing, I guess, huh? And he said, yeah, that's what they want. They want one specific thing. So I said, okay, well, look, give me a few weeks and to put a band together, and we'll do that. Well, I contacted over a period of 2 weeks. I went through so many different players, auditioning them in New York City. At that time, I was living there. And finally, I had 2 weeks left, and I had to come up with a band. In came 3 players out of Berklee School of Music. And I had written 2 songs that were in a jazz fusion kind of system,
A vein,
and
yeah.
we played those 2 songs, and when at rehearsal they performed, I said, this is the band. And out came Joyous Lake. And that kind of music became a product in itself, And it was very successful. It was very successful at that time. But it brought it about, in a real long kind of way. So many things were experienced that it's unbelievable in itself, but brought all of those things together.
Yeah, I mean, you're really whack. You're talking about Mark Leonard, Delmar Brown, and who were the 3 cats that came out of Berklee?
It was Mark Leonard on bass. Delmar Brown was the keyboard player, and Kenwood Denard was the drummer.
I know. I'm so glad you pivoted into that. Before we move on, I actually wanted to ask you if you could share any recollection or
forgive me for interrupting.
No, go ahead, please.
It was something that was learned in the process that was also extremely important. For instance, we were in Florida to record Joyous Lake at a studio. I forget the name of the studio, but there were 2 studios in that particular establishment, and we were doing two albums, 2 artists. It was Joyous Lake in the smaller studio and Earth, Wind, and Fire in the larger studio, all simultaneously. And during the process of recording Joyous Lake, Delmar Brown's dad became very ill and was on the verge of passing away. And I said to Delmar, this is a time, as important as this album is, this is a time for you to go back and visit Mom and the family, because Willie is on the verge of departing. That to me was more significant with the music than whether or not the music would come through on record. Delmar went back to Chicago. A little outside of Chicago was the town they lived in. And his mom said, Delmar, and his dad told him, Delmar, you got to go back down to Florida and do this album. It's real important. And that's what Delmar did. He came back to Florida, to Miami, and we did the album. In the process, his dad passed away, But that experience of really caring, reality should never, ever be a distracting intruder. It should always be part of the power that elongates the ecstasy of the art that you've been gifted with.
Wow, man, unbelievable, Pat. Before we move on, could you just talk about, we've lost several titanic figures in music this year already, and one of them was Larry Coryell, and I wasn't sure if you what you could share with the audience about any relationship you had with him, or just honestly what his significance is to music history.
Well, gosh, I don't know where to begin with that.
Just
Larry, God bless him, was an incredible source of ideas for the music business for decades. As far as the loss, I don't see the living process, a loss in any way. I see the vehicles change, but I don't see the source of the power that operates them as being subject to birth and death. I believe in life eternal. I believe in eternal life. So I don't see a loss in the process. Mm-hmm. I see a different vehicle is in process right now. So, of course, I miss Larry, and there's quite a number of others as well. But I don't see that literally. I don't see that as the majority of us do.
Can you talk about one idea that he gave to the industry that he was way ahead of, that wound up being some people credit him as being a pioneer of jazz rock music. I just wasn't sure when you said that. It kind of piqued my interest there.
Well, the last time we played together was at the Blue Note in New York City, and Larry had his group. In fact, it was two guitars. It was Larry and Vic Juris. And I had my group, which was the organ trio that I'm currently using. And the one thing that I noticed so much about Larry is as a leader, as a businessman, as an entertainer. It was incredibly serious entertainment with Larry. I don't know what else to say about that. I think that's a very powerful.
Did you say furious?
Quite a number of different artists in many fields.
Did you say furious?
They have that blessing,
Did you use the word furious?
Pardon me?
What was the word you used? You said furious? Is that the word you used? Or serious?
No, I said Vic Juris.
No, but you said his demeanor as a leader, as an entertainer, as a businessman, you said it was furious. You used some term that I couldn't quite understand. It was either furious or serious. Serious, yeah.
But I think it was furious as well. I mean, it was something that went on and on and on, and Larry never changed. I mean, Larry, in the beginning, my first album was signed with Vanguard Records, and Paul, I'm trying to remember, who was the bassist with Bill Evans?
Was it Eddie Gomez or
Chuck Israels?
Chuck Israels,
it was Chuck Israels, who was my producer.
Wow.
At that time, who became a very close friend and still remains a close friend throughout these years. But at any rate, we did an album, and that was my first album for Vanguard Records. And Vanguard Records signed me to get me off the street, primarily because they had invested a lot of money in Larry Coryell. And that's how Larry and I met. Larry was my enemy at that time. He was what the record business can do to an artist if they don't know anything about how they work. Later on, when Larry and I met personally, things changed drastically because the person then came through, and he wasn't really wearing the mask of the record label.
I just want to be clear about something you just said. Chuck was your friend, and he knew your talent, and he wanted to get you off the street. What do you mean by that?
No, Chuck didn't. The Vanguard Records had invested separate from Chuck. I don't even think that Chuck knew that. None of us did. because Chuck brought in some great players for that session. He brought in Ron Carter and Tommy Flanagan, amongst others.
I'm looking at this right now. 1960 for the audience out there. This is huge. I mean, of course, it's on Pat Martino's discography at his website, patmartino.com. 1966 unreleased Vanguard LP. It has never seen the light of day. That has never seen the light of day.
No. They invested in that, and they paid me $500 for that, which I thought was a lot of money at that time.
I'm okay with that. I'd still take that. But Pat, I have become, since we last talked, I have become obsessed. Every studio drummer or rock drummer, it doesn't matter who it was. Could be Jim Keltner, could be Carmen Appice, could be John Densmore, it could be Rick Marotta. I mean, we're talking about anyone.
Sure.
These cats, okay, all of them grew up listening to drummers that were primarily keeping time on the cymbals and maybe using the bass drum to accentuate or to a degree using the bass drum to keep time. But it is not like in today's pop music you hear today the use of double bass drums as the main primary timekeeper. And to me, you can talk about the lineage of it with Kenny Clarke and Max Roach and on and on and on. But this idea, when I go back and listen to the music that Sherman Ferguson played with you, that all these great rhythmatists were dancing on the cymbals, man. And I just want you to talk about, in your mind, how basically I've talked to Reggie Workman and Joe Sample, rest in peace. And both of them, Reggie Workman said he could go see a 45-minute jazz set today, and it's really hot and it's very tight, but the drummer doesn't touch the cymbals. And Joe Sample said, he goes, the drummers could be in their 50s, and they don't know how to use the cymbals for colors. And to me, it's like I'm searching for this feel that I feel in the music that I love so much, and I have pointed directly to this idea that all these rock cats that were these famous studio musicians have such great taste because all they were listening to were cats that were keeping time on the cymbals. And I just wanted you to riff on that. It's not really even a question. It's just really it's become a huge part of my show.
Well, I think it's not only the cymbals, but it's the coordination of all of the every section of that set where the drummer really has control of expression. And yeah, the cymbals are really important. I don't know what to say about that. I've had the pleasure of working with such great players. Gosh, along the lines of Charlie Persip, and of course Kenwood. Wood is incredible in himself, but there have been so many great players that, again, for me personally, it's difficult to hone in on one specific segment of what they are in total. So it's kind of hard for me to describe my feelings about that, because I see the unification of all of these things all at once. So it's difficult.
No, and I get that. It's just like Mike Maynard said that there was a period of time on the bandstand when he would be playing with an upright bass player and it was unamplified, and there was, you could really hear the different instruments. It was not this pulsating double bass drum where there's no space.
Sure.
What is, I guess here's the question. Using you said, I think, was having being able to demonstrate control of the drum set and play. You know what it was? Those drummers, Persip, they played the song, Pat. They didn't keep time. They played the song. And
for sure.
And that's what I'm trying to get at here, is the melodic, that the drum is a timekeeper, but it is also a melodic instrument. That's what I hear.
Yeah.
So there's not really a question involved with it. It just has more to do with the idea of when you play the song, can you talk to the audience, when the drummer plays the song, how does that allow the music to breathe? How does it create space in the music? How does it make it swing harder?
It's the culmination of the entire group paying attention to each other. we're playing each other. And I think that's what it comes down to. If the drummer or any other member of the group is solely focused upon themselves, something is wrong. There is no collective message. It's not together. It's not blended. It's not balanced. He's not plugged in. So, maybe that's one of the reasons why it's impossible for me to pick out a specific player. The only time that I have done that is because the player really was out of place.
Right. My head is spinning. I want you to again. I want you to listen to this voice. I want you to enjoy this, and so you know that I've been thinking about you along the way here. So let's take a listen to this, and we'll come back and talk about it.
And very welcoming, and if you know Pat, that's who he is. He's very genuine and has a lot of love. So the way I see now it's all going to come full circle. Now I already had a relationship with Joey and Byron, and when I first moved to New York to study at the New School, which I was there 2 years before I started Juilliard, so that's how that happened. But I was studying with Billy Hart, like I said, which Billy was supposed to make this week at the Iridium in New York with Joey and Pat. He couldn't make it, so Byron made the hit. Okay, and this is right before that Live in Yoshi's record.
Exactly.
And so Billy sends me down. He says, "Hey, man, I know you know Joey, so maybe he can get you on the list. And can you go down there and like really peep the music for me, so I can learn it?
Sure, sure.
When I get back."
You were a scout. You were scouting.
I was scouting, yeah, and I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, like, I was green. I didn't know what was going on. So I hung out every day, every set during this whole week, and I got to meet Pat, and he saw this little kid, in the dressing room, and like, he didn't say too much to me, but he took notice. Fast forward, maybe what was it, 12 years or so.
That Yoshi CD was like 2001 or so. I don't know.
Yeah. So fast forward to, I think I joined his band in 2011.
But anyway, he didn't say anything to you that time, right?
No, he just saw he this little kid in the back in the dressing room at the Iridium who was friends with Joey.
Right.
And so remember, I was learning this music all these years leading up. So when I finally got a chance that I would share the stage with Pat, he was a guest with Joey and I once again at the Iridium. And this is 2011, so this is the first time we played. And he turned around and said, "You were that kid that was coming around, blah, blah, blah." And what was interesting is I think Pat was trying to set me up or see what I was made of, because about 5 days before our hit, he sends me a book of 30 tunes.
Wow.
And he said, "Hey, man, I can call any one of these tunes, so, try to learn them." And I'm like freaking out, because I was like, how am I going to learn all these tunes in 5 days? Then I started doing my research. I started listening, blah, blah, blah. I knew, 80% of the tunes. Like, really knew them inside and out.
Right.
So we get on the bandstand, and we're sound checking, and he starts calling these tunes, and he's like, do you have the music, man? And I said, no, I think I'm okay. I'm okay. And we just had a ball, and he would play, and he'd turn around to me, just kind of give me a little smile. So
what a beautiful story. Because you know
very
what?
Very encouraging, and I basically joined the band shortly after that.
Who is that, Pat?
You must be kidding. That's Carmen and Terry.
You better believe it. So let's get it on the record. Were you seeing what he was all about when you called him 5 days before and dropped 32 the book on him?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Pat, I just want to say that to me, that's why I love you so much, man. Like, there's no judgment. It's about intention. You know, you do need to have fundamentally your rudiments, but I just, to me, do you feel like one of your, aside from continuing to play with your favorite toy, is it about inspiring other people at this point? As we know, life is eternal. You know, we both believe that. But is inspiration for inspiring others is it a priority for you?
Of course. You know, it's very similar to what all of us enjoy and what we experience. We're going to have dinner with a few people that we know, and we're looking forward to having a good time. And we're looking forward to enjoying some great food, and that's the people that we know. That's the band. The great food that we're going to enjoy together. That's music that was chosen. So it's very similar to everyday living. You know, it's an event that we look forward to.
I'm going to read you this quote from Miles, and I want you to talk about how, if you could point to a specific time at all when you either had to relay this on the bandstand to somebody non-verbally, or whether, in your case, how it fit into your career. He said, if you hear something that would fit in with what's going on around you, you play it. If it doesn't fit with what's going on around you, then you're just listening to your ego. You're trying to play something that's hip as opposed to playing something that's relevant. Hip as opposed to relevant. Can you relate to that comment at all in your career? Was there a time when when your ego was above the music and you were playing hip stuff when in reality it wasn't relevant?
I don't remember a time that I experienced that personally, but I do remember a time when someone who was chosen for a performance did so, and I remember bringing it to their attention, you know, at the end of the engagement.
Did you use the same kind of language? I mean, I'm always interested in how these teachable moments are so important as opposed to demeaning someone, berating them. I mean, how do you get that stuff across in your own way, Pat?
The moment that it emerges is a moment of truth. We learn more about ourselves in the way we react to events of that nature. And when you want to explode with frustration towards someone because of a lack of enjoyment, and you get to that point where you're on the verge of the explosion itself, and something clicks off in you that stops you from doing so, and you're at the end of it, you're happy that you didn't, and you feel better about yourself that you avoided something that would be really very difficult for the other person to understand what brought it about. So it's a learning process, you know, and in the length of that experience, you learn how to be a little bit more subtle in bringing it to the attention of someone else who failed to have that rapport, you know, and in the process they gain from it as opposed to any kind of injury that it could have been, you know.
Right, but
I think that has a great deal to do with it as a band leader. And I think that Miles also is totally correct in what he has to say, you know.
Oh, absolutely. You know, final question. It's a multi-part question. It goes back to what I asked you at the beginning about the passing down of the knowledge of music or being self-taught. Did you have a longing when you made Ballena, and it maybe it didn't have huge commercial success, but it actually holds up better today than probably it did then. But you were curious about the timeless music of India. Did you have an opportunity to actually travel to the country of India to experience, or even Africa, to experience the music and the way it is incorporated into the culture and the way it is a language and the way it is played on the street? And then furthermore, the second part to the question is, you did go out to sunny California. That's when you were with Warner Brothers. Did you ever go to Ali Akbar Khan's school to actually meet Ali Akbar Khan?
Well, I never went to the school, but I did meet Ali Akbar Khan.
Can you talk about that experience?
I met Ali Akbar Khan along with Ravi Shankar when I was with John Handy's group.
Mm-hmm.
It was myself and John and Bobby Hutchinson, and John used to live at 608 Haight Avenue in San Francisco, and Ravi had an apartment on the second floor. And that's where I met Ravi, and of course, with Ali Akbar Khan as well.
Okay, so this is going back to when you were with Bobby and John, because John was in the 70s.
Yes.
In the 70s, John was doing seminal work with Ali Akbar Khan on record.
Yes.
And you were out in Keystone at that time. That's
right.
So Ravi was in the Haight at that time in the late 60s or whenever you were out there? That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a great time. These were great times.
And have you ever, a lot of people get confused that the Greeks and the Romans started civilization, but we know Africa to be the motherland and India. Did you put yourself in, did you ever put yourself in those timeless cultures once you became so intrigued with the music itself?
No. In fact, I've never been to India nor Africa.
Interesting.
But I've been to the Far East quite a bit, and I've really been affected by Japan, and I don't know where to begin with that. So to answer your question, no, I've never been there.
Sure. Well, it was just. Please send my love to Aya, Pat. I
really will.
And I'll be in touch with you. I got a couple things I need to ask you about, but I just want to say thank you for continuing to inspire because of your individuality and your authenticity. It's things are really cooking along, and what's cool is to know that some of the stuff that you said to me when we first connected, I didn't necessarily understand it, but now it's becoming much more clear, and for that I thank you and love very much to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake, and all my love too. And I certainly will relate what you've shared with Aya, and I'm sure she sends you all our love as well.
Hope to see you this summer, my friend. We'll be in touch, all right?
Wonderful.
All right, love always.
Take care, Jake.
All right, Pat.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, man. Just another great hang with Pat Martino. Ravi Shankar living at 608 Haight Street. That's a revelation. Delmar Brown being told by Pat to go back to his parents, and then his parents sending him back to Florida where they cut Joyous Lake, and on and on and on and on. Just another timeless trip. We'll be back with another titan of music, Michael Carvin, right after this.